You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Can you really work less, earn more, and actually enjoy your life? Get all the details in today's episode. This episode contains strong language, and listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we take a closer look at the corporate world and why so many people feel stuck in a cycle of overwork and burnout. Our guest shares what he learned from years inside some of the largest companies, the flaws he saw in the system, and how he found a way to break free without sacrificing success. Recruited right out of college to work at one of the largest data firms, McMann embarked on an 8-year journey from new grad to consulting director. Privileged to see behind the curtain of some of the largest corporations today, he recognized the system was broken and quit at the height of his career when working the least but making the most money he ever had, betting everything, including his money, reputation, and time, on trying to fix the problem of the corporate jungle. He shares his insights in his new book, Hacking the Corporate Jungle: How to Work Less, Make More, and Actually Like Your Life. When he's not writing, researching, and speaking, Sean spends his time riding his bike, visiting art museums, snowboarding, and playing with his 2 young sons. Let's meet Jōrni McMann. Hi, Sean. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because how to hack the corporate lifestyle is such a fascinating topic for our discussion today. And I have a feeling that there are many, many listeners who are going to identify with that in a big way. So thanks for joining me today and welcome to the podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited. A little nervous, as I was saying earlier, but super excited.
Yeah. And you know what? We're going to talk about the things that you're really passionate about and that you experienced in your own life. So it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful chat that we're going to have. And start us off with a little bit about yourself, Sean, and maybe share with our listeners how your story starts, where your story starts, and how that connects to what you do today or what it is that we're going to be talking about today. It's always nice to get to know our guests a little bit.
I appreciate that. So I was born in Denver, Colorado, and I went to school here as well. And right out of college, I got recruited by one of the largest data firms here in the United States that you probably never heard of. And I worked for them for 8 years. And in that time, became a consulting director, went from new grad to consulting director. And all of my coworkers, which meant all of my coworkers were like 15 years older than me, which brought its own, I wouldn't say pain points, but I'd say opportunities for growth, as they say in corporate speak. And in that time, I went from working like a dog, I'd say working a ton, to being able to give my team almost all of my tasks completely, to the point that I don't even know if I was working 2 hours a day. And I had more work-life balance than I'd ever have in my life. I was getting, like, to give you an example, I was getting like 2 massages a week. I was going to yoga regularly. I just started acupuncture. I had, well-being. I had work-life balance. And what I didn't anticipate was the guilt that would eventually set in. And I should tell you all, I'm from a blue-collar family. My mom is a retired teacher, and my dad's a trucker. And so the fact that I could be making such good money in corporate America and working so little really messed with my psyche and really started affecting my mental and physical health as a result. And so I initially wrote this book to help people get to where I was. And then as I started researching and finishing the book, I started realizing that, I think what I'm most passionate about now is I think we need to redesign. I started with, we need to redesign the American economy. And where I'm at now is we need to redesign and architect the entire global economy. But that's the big pie.
Amazing. And I'm not sure we're going to have time to redesign the economy in this episode, but we're definitely going to dig into some of the things that you write about in your book. So I'm sure listeners are curious now because you mentioned a book. Tell us what the title of the book is and maybe give us a bit of an overview before we dive into the pieces a little bit deeper. Tell us what it's about. You gave us a little bit of a hint, but tell us what it's about.
Yeah, so the book is called Hacking the Corporate Jungle: How to Work Less, Make More, and Actually Like Your Life. And it's out on all the major carriers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Kindle, iBooks. And it's about really what I learned in those 8 to 9 years in corporate America on how to manage my time. So I would say the core thesis in the book is manage your time better to have a better life. And so we start by talking about what I call work fetishes. And I think right now globally, certainly in America, we have like this work fetish with work has to be hard. It has to be painful. All of those weird things where if you look around where we've reached as industrialized countries, there's really no reason why we're working more than a couple hours a day at all. And so, we're just we're just on, we're like robots right now. We're on habit and none of us are really talking about how we've done it, right? We have shelter, we have everything we need, we have food. Why are we working so hard? We've, as a civilized society, we've really done it in a lot of respects. So the first part of the book kind of starts redefining that work and how we need to get out of the fetish culture, as it were. And then it really moves into the biggest time sucks that most people spend at work. And I start with email and meetings and then what I call pretending to work. And I take each one of those down in a chapter and it basically explain how you can shave time off your day immediately. Average stats now have people in their email 4 to 5 hours a day. And so if you don't buy my book for any other reason, you could buy an email chapter. It immediately goes, if you regularly check your email that much, I roll out a daily protocol for you. So you immediately go to checking email only 20 to 30 minutes a day. And so right there, you save hours of work. And then I help you reprioritize and reschedule your day around a concept called peak time, or when you're likely in your flow state. So you can not only do work most efficiently, but you can do it faster. The idea is work less to actually work better. Multitasking is a myth, which I also address as well.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I can feel that probably some listeners are rolling their eyes right now and going, Sean, there's no way that I can work 2 hours a day. I'm busy from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. And then I come home and there's more to do. I can't even sleep because I'm so stressed out. So is that really a myth that we have to work all of these hours, even when we are in corporate? Because you came from a corporate background. So is there a chance that your boss is going to get very angry with you if you're not working? Or how does that work on the scale when you're working for someone else?
Well, that's a great point. I address this actually in a section of my book. I'm like, that's why I call it hacking. You obviously can't go to your boss and go, hey, I want to hack my day so I can work less. You cool with that? Right. You're exactly right. In today's economy, in today's work culture, they're more likely to think you're stealing from them or you're lazy, which is, a cultural, it might as well be a moral argument at this point. Being lazy is akin to being evil nowadays for some reason. So a great question. I would say I have a chapter in there about how to manage your boss. But from what I've found, and a core theme and focus of my book is focus on performance. You can train your boss to care about the things that actually matter. And if they don't, I provide some perspective on maybe why they're micromanaging you. And I'll tell you right now, if you have a micromanager, someone who's constantly on you all day long, every day, I share a little bit from my own story about how that micromanager is probably unstable in their own job, why they're acting like that. And ultimately, I give the recommendation that you should find a new boss. But there are ways where you can make it better, and there are ways you can manage your boss. And there truly are bosses out there who are great, who want you to be healthy and have work-life balance and all of those things. And yeah, it's possible. It's definitely possible.
Yeah, I feel like working longer doesn't always equate to doing more work. And you hinted at that. I think the longer we work, the less productive we actually get because we get tired and we get distracted. So to me, that idea that we have to work long doesn't necessarily mean that we're being productive that whole time, because our energy is being sapped over the course of that day and trying to focus on so many things and get them done. So yeah, that was something that you touched on that probably that doesn't equate to productivity all day long. So it might actually be better for our bosses if we work less time but are more productive in that time, and the output per day actually will be much greater than working the full 8, 10, even, a lot of people work 14, 16 hours a day. So that our productivity actually will go up if we have a healthier balance. And on that, I want to ask you, there had to be this reason, obviously, why you decided to write the book, and also what happened to you in corporate. So what were some of the things that were happening to you when you at first didn't have a work-life balance that kind of pushed you to say, man, this is not working for me. I need to find a work-life balance. What happens when we don't make time for that and when we don't create that balance?
Your body, I think you mentioned it earlier when we were talking and getting to know each other. Your body, I think, physically manifests any mental things that I don't want to say like diseases, but your body breaks down. And that's essentially what happened to me. I was getting sick all the time. And then, well, before I got sick all the time, the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, I wasn't able to rush as much, right? Like in lockdown, I used to travel a lot and I was a consultant. And so my team, we were on a hybrid schedule anyway. And so I'd only see, the guys once or twice a week. And then my boss, she was great. I'd see her maybe once every other week. And so I really was just very independent, kind of doing my own thing, running my own accounts, and until I got my own team. And the pandemic hit, and I remember one day, like looking outside, we had really, during one stretch of the pandemic here in Denver, we had terrible forest fires too. I don't know if it reached the news over there. And so it's like people were sending pictures like it was hell on earth. Like it looked, straight out of like, the Bible. And I remember looking outside and just thinking like, how have I been happy with just this all along? And I don't know. I mean, at 26, I guess I had this moment where I started making more than my dad ever had his entire life. And what we first did with it is we bought a big house and we filled it with a bunch of stuff, and we essentially like made our own hotel, and not a 5-star one, but a hotel all the same. And it still, I don't know, there was just like, to describe it, there was just this feeling inside, this knowing that something was wrong and it was still wrong. And I was fortunate enough at that age to be able to check off every box, that they gave you. And so, Petra, going back to one of your earlier questions, like, some of your listeners might be rolling their eyes right now, like thinking this isn't possible. I think you were trained to think that, to be honest. I think we were all kind of trained to stay very active on the hamster wheel and not slow down and not pay attention. And I think in an industrial era, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, maybe that made sense. But I think nowadays with the advancement of technology, it's like I've taken the red pill. If you've ever seen The Matrix, like I can't unsee it. It's so outdated now that it's egregious. It really is egregious. I mean, to give you an idea, the 40-hour work week really rolled out in the 1920s. Henry Ford offered more pay and a guaranteed 40-hour work week to all automobile builders and journeymen. And in doing so, he essentially established the 40-hour work week. And then here in the United States, it quickly rolled out with legal legislation. And then I understand that the world followed. And that was in 1920, before we had penicillin, right? Before antibiotics was invented. It was certainly before we had mass telephones, before we had electricity across most of the countryside. It was before we had speed bullet trains, and it was before we had the internet. And so it's like, when you look at like how much you spend in email, for example, like email is a really great invention, except if you're now in it 4 or 5 days a week. And so, speaking out loud, I'd say my book encourages everyone to revisit things in your life and your work life with fresh eyes and think, does this really make sense? Because as I was getting promoted and as the pandemic was really wearing on me, I had the privilege of then being colleagues with people who were 15 or 20 years older than me. And my mentor at the time used to be our CFO. And I remember he had taken over my team and a few others as like an experimental squad to see if we could learn this new tech. And so it was a really fun time. I always liked sinking my teeth into the new project, and it was a true workaholic. Like, that's hard. Everyone's saying they can't do it. Throw me on it, boss. I'll figure it out. And I just remember like telling him, like, this makes no sense. Like, I'm not doing well. My numbers are going up. selling more, I'm closing more deals, I'm taking care of my clients, I'm bringing on more teammates. We're growing, we're doing well, but I'm still missing something, and it doesn't make sense that I can make this much money and everyone who works for me, who's really now doing the work, is making less. And him and his colleagues and more senior personnel gave me all of these things that I could do. One guy even was like, "You should get a mistress," and I was like, I don't think that's, I just had two kids. I was like, I don't think that's a workable thing for me. But they all had like ideas, like you just, you need to layer more, you need to get people in between, and it was all it reminded me of George Orwell's, 1985. Like none of it was actually addressing the issue. It was just all these little shortcuts of how to hide it, how to cover it up, and how to ignore it and medicate essentially. And yeah, staring out into that pandemic and thinking about the world, and then looking into my two sons' little faces, I just realized like I had to try to do something, because them inheriting this work culture, if this is, if I was successful by popular definition and I felt this way, I in good conscience couldn't pass that on to my sons. Something had to change.
Yeah, that's an important point. Just all of a sudden, our external world comes into dissonance with our internal world, and it starts creating problems on the happiness level and the fulfillment level. And there comes the question: well, is this all there's to it? I have all this money, I have all these things. Is that all there's to it? And what can we do about that? So, how does that work, Sean, for people who, for example, have to work two or three jobs to make ends meet and to put a roof over their heads and to deal with the economy as it is at the moment, with high prices and high costs for a lot of things? Are there still small changes or little steps that people can take, even in those situations, to move them maybe more towards a work-life balance, even if maybe the full change isn't possible at that exact time? But are there still little things that they can do?
Oh, absolutely. And I actually have a section in one chapter in my book about how to find the right job, just so you can make more and work less. And so I would encourage your listeners to check that out. There's a lot to unpack there. I would start by saying, I think a lot of people are probably already doing this, but buy used. In our global economy now with the internet, I mean, you could almost get anything secondhand from anywhere in the world. So I would try and save some money that way. And I've done it before, worked the three jobs, and it's like, and you kind of get into this mindset. To encapsulate it, let me think here. To encapsulate it, it's like, oh, if I keep working and I keep grinding, eventually things are going to work out. And what we then often do is maybe there's a mixer, or there's a networking event, or even there's something fun that you could go to that's like a game or something, and you put that on the back burner. You say, I don't have time, I don't have money for that, and instead you just keep working. And what I found throughout my career and my life is taking time to have fun, to network, to do this stuff that's not work, but semi-related to work, or kind of feels like work, especially if you're an introvert, is actually the most important stuff. Like putting yourself in the room, knowing the right people, that is truly how you get where you want to go from maybe where you are. And so, you're not going to get promoted to run the company one day if you're the hardest worker. If you're the hardest worker, they're going to keep you working as hard as possible, as long as possible, because of your output's such a great ratio, right? That's just what you learn in business management school. And so if you really do want to climb up and work less and find more balance, you need more time to find a better position. And if you like your job and you're one of those few people who are like, I don't want to be a manager, I don't want to climb up the ladder, I just want to do this and want to make better money, taking more time and slowing down also presents is it gives yourself time to be creative. I talk about it in the book as well, but there are studies out there that show our brains only have so much creative power on any given day before we essentially, it's kind of like a battery before we have to recharge and sleep. And so if you're constantly running that battery super low, you have no time for creative insights, to look at things anew, to develop new solutions, and developing those new solutions, making your work more efficient, coming up with simple hacks, as you could call them, to use my book's terminology, coming up with simple hacks to make your work more streamlined, more efficient, and ultimately allow you to work less, only comes from space and taking time to slow down. And so I think the first thing I would recommend those readers to do is stop believing in that what I would say, that lie that you should be on all the hamster wheels and you should be running as fast as possible. That's how you get where you're going. And all the prominent figures in history I've ever read, the one thing that struck me most was how much leisure time a lot of them had, and how much time, like even here in America, we all read about Silicon Valley tech tycoons, and a lot of them, yeah, they might have worked a lot when they were starting their company, but the fact that they could work at a company that wasn't making money for practically no money, that's an amount of space and time and financial health that the majority of us, I don't think, really start with. And we don't really, you could say it's privilege. We don't really talk about how a lot of the most successful people in the world today start with that base level of privilege where they can spend the majority of their time early on in their career doing something, building something that they really believe in. Because the majority of us, right, have to wash dishes and wait tables and do the things that just pay the rent. And and so I would say, yeah, your first focus should be freeing up time, working less, even if it's, consuming less so you can cut back on a job. It's worth it. And, come up with a 2 or 3 year plan. And, I have a workshop coming out in March that'll be out in March. And I can help you with a lot of that stuff too, if you're interested. And regardless of what your budget is, we can find a way to make it work. I truly believe. I mean, I'm getting off the rails now, but I think sometimes politically we talk politics and we elect leaders because we're like, oh, they're going to save us, and I don't believe in that. I believe in this what's called a network effect, and it's talked about in sociology, it's talked about in psychology, but the way I mean it is actually coming from computer science. And the network effect is this idea that you can have all these separate nodes and all these different computers doing little things that actually makes a better result than one computer driving, programming, and architecting the total program, if you will. And it's this idea that, long story short, whoever's listening to this, right, whoever your listeners are, Petra, I think they need more time so they can contribute to that network more. I don't think our leaders are going to come up with more social programs that are going to solve the world's problems. I think the problem really we have now is we don't have all of the nodes of the network, or really all of the people involved on this planet, paying attention and slowing down enough to get creative with one another and come up with the solutions faster. And what we say in tech is rapidly iterate, right? We need a lot of rapid iteration on some of these really complex problems. And rapid iteration is just not possible if you have a few very wealthy or very prominent and powerful people trying to solve all the problems. It's much faster if all of us are working on them together.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I've actually never thought of it like that before. And that makes a lot of sense, that we need to network together. We need to each do our things, the things that align with us and the things that fulfill us, because then we're much more efficient at it. We're contributing that piece that actually lights us up, which works much better for the entire rest of the network. So that makes so much sense. And there's a big light bulb moment now also, hopefully for listeners, to put all of this into perspective and why you need to free up some more time so that you can actually use that creative power that you have much more efficiently. Because you're right, when we're bogged down with all the work and the negativity and the pressure and the stress every day, I think probably the first place that you're going to head is burnout. And there's no more creativity really there. You're just surviving and you're trying to actually just keep alive while you're trying to manage the stress load that you have every day. So that makes a lot of sense to say, take a step back and find ways to free up even just an hour to maybe spend in a networking meeting, or just even online if you don't have the time to go somewhere. But take that time for yourself and make that change, because it's actually going to have a huge ripple effect through your mental and physical health as well. So, wow, that was a big moment. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks for actually digressing, because that was a good point to bring in here. And let's talk a little bit about the guilt that you mentioned in the beginning, because that is also something that I don't think many people talk about. A guilt of when they're working less and they're making good money and they're working less. So what happened and how did you work with that when that came up?
So I was in therapy. To be honest, I was going to active therapy, and things at work were really great for me at the time, and things at home were not. And I ended up getting divorced, which was good for her and good for me and good for the kids. Now we're co-parenting, and that's an adventure in and of itself. But I started reading a lot, I guess, and I read a lot of prominent autobiographies, a lot of biographies. I read, being an entrepreneur, a business major, I have read almost every founder's book that I can find to understand how you start a great company. And what I found was a human being is not the company they create. And I know this is kind of abstract to answer the question, but stick with me for a second. So I had this idea of like, I'm going to be this very successful person and I'm going to start this $1 billion company and it's going to go really well. And then I will be remembered for all time. And it was kind of, I think, very conceited, I would say, and narcissistic at the time. But then, my kids were born and I started reading about these prominent people and I realized that none of us really know who the 1900 industrialists are, with the exception of Henry Ford. And that's just because his name is still on one of the cars some of us drive. We don't know who any of the 1800s, industrialists were. If you go back to the 1700s, nobody really knows who invented, blue magenta or did it, back then painting was a huge industry. And so inventing new pigments was a thing. Time changes all things. And once I embraced that, I started seeing that I was so much more than what I could work and and how much I could output and how hard I worked, and defining a human being's worth off their work, I thought was like defining a book off its introduction. It can give you some evidence, but it's not going to be the whole story. And I was, yeah. Does that answer your question? I might need to hear the question again, Petra.
Actually, you brought up another really great point there. And
Okay.
yeah, I think this is just full of light bulb moments. But yeah, share with us a little bit about where that guilt maybe set in, because you said that there was a point when you experienced that guilt. So was that when you realized that you were working less than other people in the company or that you were making more than other people in the company? When did that guilt set in, and what did you do about it? Or did you do anything about it? I guess that's the good question as well. Did you do anything about it? Because if that comes up for people who are looking to actually work more productively or work less, they might have that same challenge that eventually they will run into feeling really guilty. So how do we work with that?
Yeah. So I would say my response to that was the most extreme. I ended up quitting. I was like, I can't support this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I want to do something else with my time. And, in true workaholic fashion, spent that next Monday then writing 5 hours a day. 9 versions later, here's the book finally coming out published. So you could quit. That's always an option, I guess, if you really want to go extreme. The other one is along with the guilt of work, there's all of these notions and ideas of how to manage people and how to control people. And some of it is just downright keeping information from people. And so depending on your position and depending on how much power you have, you can share more with your employees. You can open up more. You can share the reality. I don't think a lot of employees, who have not managed a business really understand how much insurance costs, how much just some of those hidden costs of business really are. And sometimes educating them helps more light bulb moments happen for them and realize all that you do and all that they don't want to do, for example. But going back to that network effect, versus the hierarchical structure, I think to get around that guilt, you need to follow your intuition and you need to make sure you're living, in alignment with yourself. And if your gut is saying, stop listening to the business book, if the business book is like, well, don't tell them that, and your gut is like, I should really bring this up and let them know. And, they'll probably quit, but, it's best for them. Listen to your gut. I don't think some of the best bosses I've ever had were people first, and they really cared about me, or I think they really cared about me. And a lot of times they did things that was against the book, that was not supposed to happen, but they did it because they cared about me as a person and wanted me to be informed. And that directly led to my career projecting, climbing so fast and getting me to where I was. And it also led me to realize, like, I think some of the hierarchical structures we have remaining in the workforce are outdated if your people become healthier, happier, more educated. I mean, we're the most educated generation in, global history. Clearly, how we work and how we manage each other has to change. Even not drastic, maybe you're not on board with me like drastically, but it has to change a little bit at least. And I think that's what we're finding with some of this age-old corruption that's coming out all across the globe, that all of these marches and riots and things that are happening, I think we're really starting to realize, like, you know, there's too much power laying in too few hands. And I think some of those echoes reverberate in the very workforce. And what I found is, especially as a manager, the more how I dealt with the fear is I shared more information with some of my employees than maybe I should have, or certainly than the book maybe should have. And they all went on to get, promotions or better jobs, higher paying jobs. It did them all really well. It was really good for them. And it was really good for me because I think sometimes as a manager, when you're in that layer of all the information that's coming down and no one else below you is supposed to know, you absorb all of that weight and that pressure, and that's further. Maybe it's not guilt, it's stress, it's fear. It's, in talking with entrepreneurs, I have a few prominent ones in my circle, and in talking with them, they talk about, well, I just can't stop working, man. Like, all of these families are relying on me. And it's like, it's kind of egotistical. Like, really not, because that family has someone who shows up every day and works like that. They're not really relying on you as much as you think, and sometimes I think as we get in more positions of power, we allow our kind of egos to grow with the responsibilities. And I think we, as leaders, we need to be very careful not to do that, and to share and disseminate that power, and really adopt a more networked effect, like I was saying. I'm rambling again. Did I address your question, Petra?
I think that was great, because what I'm hearing out of what you're saying is that maybe a collaborative environment is going to be much more productive for most people than sort of this top-down hierarchy that we have in a lot of the companies. And I have to say that personally, I've felt much more at ease in collaborative environments and work than having a boss from, I don't know, across the country who didn't know me, who gave the directives on what was happening, but didn't even know the people or the little branches of the companies that we were working in, right? So I think there's something to be said for that the sharing of power, the sharing of knowledge, and the sharing of our time and how we work on things, and maybe even addressing those to what we each do best, instead of just where people need us in the company, and actually considering, what are these people good at? What do they enjoy? And then putting them in those right places. I find that gets a lot more done. And certainly working as an entrepreneur, you collaborate with a lot of people doing various projects, and we're all sort of on an equal footing, right? Because we all have a business. We're each very knowledgeable in what we do, and we come together in a very different way than we do in this sort of employer-employee relationship. And I think we get a lot more done. We get a lot more projects done. We get a lot more work done. And I think we also get a lot more changes done. So yeah, there's definitely something to be said for that, of changing that culture and how things work in the business environment. And I think some people and companies are starting to do that. I think there is a drive for that, certainly from some directions, to having to change what is not working nowadays. So hopefully that will also be much better for people's mental and physical health when we have that different kind of environment that we work in. So that's another great point. So thanks for bringing that up.
You summed it up more eloquently than I was getting at. I love it. No, I totally agree. I think when you're saying that, it makes me think of what I call like the magic. Like I've had the very fortunate privilege to work on teams where that magic was present, and we did things. And to your point about entrepreneurs, I think sometimes when we sit down at the table together, we start working together, none of us really know the outcome. We just know, I think I can help you. I think you can help me, or I believe in what you're doing. Let me see if I can help. And sometimes I think in those hierarchical structures, as the boss, you think, or I at least used to, you think you need to know where you're headed. And to your point, that remote boss is pointing to the direction, even though they don't know the people or the teams or anything. And oftentimes in pointing to the direction, you close all of these potential doors of where that magic could live, and where these people could really come up with a creative solution that's on no one's radar and no one even thinks is possible. And then before you know it, is birthing $1 billion company. So it's like, I think, no, I totally agree with you. That more collaborative structure, I think, is really where the magic is. And I think nowadays you notice, if you're still in corporate America, my condolences, for the listeners in corporate America, my condolences, or corporate anywhere. You'll probably notice that every year or so they restructure. And it's because I think there are a lot of leaders out there today who really, nothing against them. I think they're trying the best they can with the book they have. But I think, like I said, I think the book they're all working from is wrong. And you don't create magic by reorganizing. Like that's just not how you create magic. Magic sometimes follows certain people. They have the ability to bring magic into the rooms. But I do think magic really can come from anywhere and from anyone if they're in the right room with the right, complementary. It's kind of like a painter's palette, like the right complementary set of colors. Anybody can make a masterpiece. You just need the right environment and time to breathe to do it.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. And so we'll give listeners a bit of hope, I think, that things can change and that even if they are in difficult environments at work or they are in difficult environments in corporate America or corporate anywhere in the world, that there is a different way to work. There's a different way to have a work-life balance. And there's a different way to feel productive and like a part of society without burning yourself out in that process and without giving yourself up in that process. So I think your book is one of those pieces that will let us see that hope and will let us see some of the steps that we can take towards that changing environment. So especially in these times today, I think our listeners can really, really use a guide like that because I feel from what I'm hearing, it seems to be getting more and more difficult for people rather than easier on the work front. So what a fantastic resource. And you also have something coming up that you touched on that will be ready in March. Let us know, what are you working on for that?
Yeah, I'm working on a hacking your day job workshop, and the details will be forthcoming, but it will be ready by mid-March. And it's a lot of what we've talked about, a lot of what's in the book. And if you're really struggling to re-architect your life, redefine things, figure out where the hidden honeypots are, the ways you can cut back on your job because you're struggling to make ends meet. We cover everything from dreams and aspirations to, if needed, coming up with a budget for you and really, and what we want to develop is an all-encompassing solution. So it'll be out on my website here soon, but it's a workshop. Yeah. Hacking your day job. Yeah. I look forward to meeting some of you and hopefully talking to you all more.
Sounds like something we can all benefit from and sign up for and join you for, especially if we're still are working in corporate. This will be a great thing to maybe take those first little steps to make a change that's needed. And I know far too many people that had heart attacks, strokes, bad health, all caused from chronic stress from their work. So I think there has to be a better way. And this sounds like a great step forward in that direction. So thank you for sharing that with us. And of course, we will be linking to all of Sean's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for his website where you can find the workshop and also where you can find his book. We'll be linking to that. And this has been an amazing time with you today. And thanks so much for joining me. And I had quite a few really great aha moments in there. So I hope our listeners had those same feelings as they were going along and finding some nuggets in there for how they can get started now. And then also coming up what they can do, next steps they can take, purchase your book, have a look in there and see, what the options are in their lives if they want to make changes. So thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You've been a delight. It's been a blast. I'm not nervous anymore.
That's perfect. I'm so glad. I was saying that all my guests made it out in one piece. So I was hoping that you were just going to enjoy yourself. And what a fantastic conversation around a topic that's so important because the majority of people have to work. It's a reality for us, right? So we need to talk about this more and get this information out to people. So thanks for sharing your passion and some of your hacks and ideas. It's absolutely wonderful. And take care, Sean.
Take care. Great meeting you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.